Welcome back to Fusty Stories. Don't forget to like, subscribe, and get ready for another story you won't forget. Let's dive back to the story. Emily sat at the edge of the bed, her hand resting gently on her swollen belly, her heart weighed down with loneliness. Richard had left the house in his usual hurry, dressed in a tailored suit that carried the faint trace of a luxury cologne she once admired. But now, that same scent only reminded her of distance, how far he had drifted from her, how unbothered he was about her struggles. She was almost due. Yet not once had he offered her comfort, a gentle word, or even the smallest amount of money to attend her hospital checkups. She tried to convince herself that marriage was about patience, that maybe he was only under stress. But the truth was sharp. Richard despised her. He had told her countless times she embarrassed him, that her existence made him feel small, and that her pregnancy only added to his shame. What stung even deeper was knowing there was another woman, Victoria, elegant, stylish, and always glowing with the gifts and attention Richard poured onto her. While Emily lay at home worrying about her unborn child, Victoria flaunted diamond bracelets and designer handbags on her arm. Richard had no problem spending thousands on her, but when Emily asked for bus fare to the clinic, he scoffed and turned away. That morning, she clutched her belly as a baby kicked, whispering soft words of comfort to her unborn child. She told herself she had to endure for the baby's sake, even if it meant bearing Richard's rejection a little longer. She didn't know that fate was preparing to change her life in the most unexpected way. The following week, Emily's health worsened. Her body ached, and her doctor had warned that skipping checkups this late in pregnancy could put both her and the baby at risk. With no choice, she decided to seek Richard at his workplace. Perhaps face-to-face, he wouldn't have the heart to refuse her. Slowly, she made her way to the tall glass building where he worked, clutching her handbag tightly, her swollen feet dragging beneath her. The receptionist looked at her with curiosity when she asked for Richard, but Emily pressed forward, determined not to let shame stop her. She needed money for the hospital, nothing more. Richard was in the middle of a conversation with his CEO, Alexander Stark, when Emily walked in. The sight of her, visibly pregnant and exhausted, silenced the room for a moment. Richard's face twisted in irritation, while Alexander's gaze lingered on her, surprised yet softened with curiosity. Emily, holding back her pride, walked up to Richard and quietly asked him for a small amount of money for her hospital checkup. She kept her tone polite, her eyes low. Before Alexander could say anything, Richard scoffed loudly and, to Emily's shock, denied her. "I don't know this woman," he said coldly. "A man like me would never stoop so low to get someone like her pregnant." Emily froze, her heart shattering, but she held back her tears. Alexander's eyes narrowed, watching Richard with disbelief, before turning to Emily with unexpected kindness. "Don't worry," Alexander said gently. "I'll take care of you." That moment, fate began to shift, though Richard felt only relief at passing her off. Emily's world was about to be rewritten by a man she never expected. Emily's heart pounded as she stood in Alexander Stark's office, unsure she had heard him correctly. How could a man like him, a CEO dressed in power and wealth, care about a stranger's struggles? Richard's mocking laugh still rang in her ears, his cruel words slicing deeper than any wound. "You'll regret coming here," Richard muttered, waving her away as if she were nothing more than a beggar. But Alexander's eyes told a different story. There was no mockery, no disgust, only genuine concern. When he stood and offered to take her to the hospital himself, Emily almost protested out of pride, but her weakening body betrayed her. She needed help, and for the first time, someone was extending a hand without expecting anything in return. The drive to the hospital was silent, except for the faint hum of Alexander's expensive car. Emily tried to compose herself, ashamed that a stranger had to step in where her husband should have been. She worried about what Alexander must think of her, but when she glanced at him, she saw no judgment, only quiet thoughtfulness. At the hospital, he waited while she got checked, settling the bills without hesitation. Emily thanked him with trembling lips, tears threatening to fall. "You don't owe me anything," Alexander said gently. "Just take care of yourself and the baby." In that moment, Emily felt something she hadn't felt in a long time: hope. When Emily returned home later that evening, Richard was waiting, his face twisted with disdain the moment he saw her. "So now you're running to men at my office for money?" he snapped, pacing the living room. "You've finally shown everyone how desperate and shameful you are." Emily stood silently, clutching her belly protectively, her tears finally spilling over. She tried to explain that she had no choice, that their child needed care. But Richard cut her off with a cruel laugh. "That child? You think that child means anything to me? I never wanted it. You're the one who trapped me with your pathetic tears." His words were daggers, sharper than anything she had endured before. That night, Emily lay awake, her heart broken beyond repair. She thought back to the promises Richard once made when they were newly married, promises of love, support, and building a life together. All of it had turned to ashes. She realized she was nothing more than a burden to him, while he spent his days showering Victoria with love, gifts, and attention. The thought made her sick to her stomach. For the first time, Emily considered the unthinkable: leaving. She had endured humiliation, cruelty, and loneliness, but with a baby so close to being born, she wondered if her child deserved a life filled with such coldness. A seed of strength began to take root inside her, though she wasn't ready to act on it yet. The following week, Emily reached her breaking point. She visited a lawyer, her hands trembling as she explained her situation. The lawyer, sympathetic to her plight, assured her she had every right to leave Richard and claim her independence. Emily felt torn between fear and liberation. She knew Richard would mock her, call her weak, and even laugh at her attempt to stand on her own. Yet, she also knew she could no longer raise her child in such a toxic home. The divorce papers were drawn up swiftly, and with the lawyer's encouragement, Emily signed them. Her hands shook, but her heart felt lighter. For the first time in years, she had chosen herself. When she presented the papers to Richard, he didn't react with sadness or regret. Instead, he laughed, a cruel, roaring laugh that echoed through the house. "You'll die of hunger without me," he sneered. "Who even wants you? You think anyone will look at you when I have Victoria by my side? You're finished, Emily." His words were meant to break her, but instead, they fueled her resolve. Emily turned and walked away, tears in her eyes but determination in her heart. She knew the road ahead would not be easy, but she had chosen freedom, and for her unborn child, she would endure. Emily's life after leaving Richard was far from easy. She moved into a small, modest apartment on the outskirts of town, relying on what little savings she had left. Days were long, and nights were filled with worry. How would she care for her child once he was born? But fate had not forgotten her. Alexander Stark reappeared in her life, this time unprompted. He had asked around discreetly and found where she lived. When he showed up at her doorstep with groceries and quiet smile, Emily was stunned. "I don't want to intrude," he said softly, "but I can't stop thinking about you, or your baby." Though hesitant at first, Emily slowly allowed Alexander into her world. He wasn't overbearing or forceful, but patient, always asking how she felt, ensuring she had everything she needed. He accompanied her to hospital appointments, paid her bills when she couldn't, and even stayed by her side during long nights when the anxiety overwhelmed her. His presence was steady, a stark contrast to Richard's coldness. Emily felt conflicted. She wasn't ready to let another man into her heart, not after everything Richard had done, but she couldn't deny the peace Alexander brought. For the first time, she felt safe. The day finally came when Emily went into labor. The pain was overwhelming, her body trembling as she was rushed to the hospital. Alexander was there, holding her hand through every contraction, whispering words of encouragement that steadied her resolve. Hours later, when the cries of a newborn filled the room, Emily felt a flood of emotions wash over her. The nurse placed her baby boy in her arms, his tiny fingers curling around hers. She named him Daniel, whispering the name like a prayer. Tears streamed down her face as she kissed his forehead, overwhelmed by both exhaustion and joy. Alexander stood by her bedside, his eyes filled with pride as though the child were his own. "He's perfect," he said softly, his voice trembling with sincerity. Emily looked at him, her heart swelling with gratitude. She couldn't remember the last time she had felt such warmth from someone. though she tried to remind herself that Alexander was just being kind. She couldn't ignore the way his gaze lingered on her with something deeper, something she had long believed she would never deserve again. For Emily, Daniel was a new beginning, and Alexander was the unexpected protector who had helped her reach it. Meanwhile, Richard's life was beginning to unravel, though he was too arrogant to notice at first. Fired by Alexander Stark after his cruel behavior toward Emily was revealed, Richard had stormed out of the company in anger, cursing both Alexander and his ex-wife. He returned to Victoria, expecting her to comfort him, but though she pretended to care, her eyes told a different story. She never loved him. She loved his money, his gifts, the lavish life he could provide. Without his high-paying job, Richard was nothing more than a burden. At first, he lived off his savings, continuing to spoil Victoria in an attempt to keep her. She encouraged him to invest what was left into a big opportunity, whispering sweet promises of a future filled with riches. Desperate to prove himself, Richard listened. He signed away the last of his money, convinced he would double it. But within weeks, the investment crumbled. His bank account was drained, his lifestyle shattered. Victoria, no longer interested in a broke man, left without a backward glance. Richard was left with nothing but regret and the bitter memory of the wife he had mocked and thrown away. While Richard's life fell apart, Emily's slowly blossomed. With Daniel in her arms, she found strength she never knew she had. Alexander continued to visit, helping her care for baby, ensuring she lacked nothing. Emily couldn't help but notice the way Daniel seemed to calm in Alexander's arms, his cries softening whenever Alexander rocked him gently. It was as if her son instinctively knew he was safe with him. Each day, Emily's gratitude deepened, and with it, a quiet affection she tried hard to ignore. Late one evening, after Daniel had finally fallen asleep, Emily found herself sitting with Alexander on the balcony. The night was cool, the city lights twinkling in the distance. "I don't know why you're doing all this for me," she admitted, her voice soft. "You don't owe me anything." Alexander turned to her, his expression serious yet tender. "Maybe I don't," he said, "but I want to. You and Daniel. You've given my life a meaning I didn't know I was missing." Emily's breath caught at his words. For years, she had been told she was worthless, but here was a man who saw her as everything. It was only a matter of time before Richard came crawling back. Broke, abandoned, and humiliated, he showed up at Emily's doorstep one rainy evening. His clothes were disheveled, his face pale, and his arrogance dimmed, though not entirely gone. "Emily," he pleaded, "please, let me come back. I made mistakes, but I'm still your husband. We can fix this." Emily stood frozen, Daniel cradled in her arms, her heart pounding. Once, she might have considered giving in, but not anymore. She had built herself up from the ruins Richard left behind, and she would never let him tear her down again. Before she could answer, Alexander appeared at her side, his presence strong and unwavering. "You need to leave," Alexander said firmly, his eyes locked on Richard. Rage flashed in Richard's face, but deep down he knew he had lost. Emily held Daniel closer, her resolve unshakable. "You had your chance, Richard," she said quietly but firmly, "and you threw it away." With those words, she closed the door on her past, leaving Richard standing in the rain with nothing but the weight of his regrets. Richard stood outside Emily's door for what felt like hours, the rain soaking through his clothes as he muttered curses under his breath. He never imagined he would fall this low, begging the very woman he once despised. But Emily's rejection stung more than he expected. It was final, absolute. He walked away that night with rage boiling inside him, yet beneath the anger lay a gnawing regret. For the first time, Richard truly realized the cost of his arrogance. He had lost his marriage, his child, his career, and now even Victoria, the woman he thought loved him, had abandoned him without hesitation. Meanwhile, Emily sat inside holding Daniel close, trying to steady her emotions. Though she had rejected Richard, his sudden reappearance shook her. Memories of the abuse and neglect replayed in her mind, but this time she refused to let them consume her. She whispered softly to Daniel, promising him that she would never allow his life to be dictated by Richard's cruelty. What she didn't admit out loud was that Alexander's presence gave her strength. His steady hand and unwavering support reminded her that love could exist even for someone as scarred as her. A few weeks later, Alexander invited Emily and Daniel to a quiet dinner at his countryside estate. Emily hesitated at first, afraid of what people might say, but eventually agreed. The evening was warm and filled with laughter as Alexander played with Daniel, who giggled each time Alexander made silly faces. Watching them together stirred emotions in Emily's heart she had long buried. She could see how naturally Alexander had stepped into their lives, not as an outsider, but as a man who truly cared. Later that night, after Daniel had fallen asleep in a crib Alexander had prepared, he finally spoke. "Emily," he began, his voice steady but vulnerable, "I never believed in love at first sight, but when I saw you that day in my office, standing there with courage despite your husband's cruelty, something inside me changed. I admire you, not just for your strength, but for the kindness you still carry despite everything you've been through. I want to be more than just a friend. I want to build a life with you and Daniel." Emily's heart raced. No one had ever spoken to her like that before. She was overwhelmed, caught between fear of being hurt again and the undeniable pull of Alexander's sincerity. Emily didn't answer immediately. She needed time to process Alexander's confession. Her life had been a storm for her so long that she struggled to trust the calm. Yet, as days turned into weeks, she couldn't deny how much she looked forward to his visits, how safe she felt when he was near, and how Daniel's face lit up whenever Alexander walked into the room. Slowly, a flicker of hope began to grow in her heart. The possibility of a future not defined by pain but by love. Alexander remained patient. He never pushed, never pressured her to make a decision. Instead, he continued to support her quietly, attending Daniel's doctor appointments, helping her set up a nursery, and even showing her how to manage her finances more wisely. For Emily, these small acts meant everything. They weren't grand gestures meant to impress. They were the steady, selfless choices of a man who truly cared. Each day that passed, Emily found herself wondering if maybe, just maybe, Alexander was the answer to the prayers she once thought had gone unheard. Meanwhile, Richard's life spiraled further out of control. With no job and no savings, he turned to drinking to numb his frustration. His once polished appearance deteriorated, and the arrogance that once defined him began to fade under the weight of poverty. He wandered the streets, trying to find odd jobs to survive, but his pride often sabotaged him. Employers sensed his bitterness, his entitlement, and turned him away. Each rejection pushed him closer to despair. One evening, drunk and angry, Richard showed up outside Emily's building again, demanding to see her. He shouted insults, his words slurred, waking neighbors who peeked to their curtains in disapproval. Emily refused to open the door, clutching Daniel tightly as Alexander, who had come to visit, confronted him. "Leave this place, Richard," Alexander said firmly. "You've lost your right to stand here." Richard's face twisted with jealousy as he noticed how easily Alexander cradled Daniel in his arms. "You think you can replace me?" Richard spat. "That's my child." But deep down, Richard knew he had already lost the role of father. He stumbled away into the night, his shame consuming him. With Richard out of the picture, Emily slowly began to build a new life. She enrolled in a course to improve her skills, determined to create financial stability for herself and Daniel. Alexander supported her decision wholeheartedly, even arranging flexible work opportunities for her within his company. Though she was initially hesitant, Emily proved herself quickly, earning respect for her dedication and intelligence. For the first time, she felt valued not just as a mother, but as a woman capable of achieving her own success. Daniel thrived in this new environment. He grew healthier and happier, his laughter filling Emily's days with joy she had once thought impossible. Alexander's presence became a constant source of strength, and their bond deepened with every shared responsibility. Every quiet evening spent together, Emily began to imagine what it would be like to accept his love fully. Though she was cautious, the walls around her heart slowly crumbled, piece by piece, replaced by something she never thought she would feel again: trust. It was a simple evening when Alexander finally proposed. They had spent the day at the park, watching Daniel play on the swings, his laughter echoing in the air. As the sun set, casting golden hues across the sky, Alexander turned to Emily with a nervous smile. "You've changed my life," he said softly. "I never thought I would find someone who could make me want to be better every single day. Emily, I love you. Will you marry me?" He pulled out a ring, modest yet elegant, its beauty reflecting the sincerity of his heart. Emily's breath caught. Her mind raced with memories of Richard's betrayal, the pain, the humiliation. But then she looked at Alexander, this man who had stood by her when she had nothing, who had loved her and her child without conditions. Tears welled in her eyes as she whispered, "Yes." The word felt like freedom, like a promise of a new beginning. Alexander slipped the ring onto her finger, his own eyes glistening with emotion. For the first time in years, Emily felt whole. News of Emily's engagement reached Richard, and it shattered what little pride he had left. He heard it through gossip in town, whispers of how Emily had moved on and found happiness with the very man who had once been his boss. The thought of her smiling, of Daniel calling another man father, filled him with a rage he could no longer control. But there was nothing he could do. He was broke, abandoned, and powerless. His health began to deteriorate as he drank more heavily. Once respected, Richard became a shadow of his former self, unshaven, bitter, and consumed by regret. He wandered the streets, muttering about betrayal, but in truth, he had betrayed himself long before anyone else. His downfall was complete, and there was no one left to save him. Even Victoria, whom he once thought would stand by him, refused to answer his calls. Richard had lost everything, and the world no longer cared. Emily's wedding day was nothing like the grand, showy ceremonies she once dreamed of as a young girl. It was simple, intimate, and filled with genuine love. Dressed in a modest white gown, she walked down the aisle, holding Daniel's tiny hand. Alexander stood waiting for her, his eyes shining with pride and devotion. Every step Emily took felt like a victory, a testament to her resilience, her courage, and the new chapter she was about to begin. The ceremony was beautiful, filled with laughter and tears. As Emily and Alexander exchanged vows, she felt a peace she had never known. For once, she wasn't marrying for appearances or out of obligation. She was marrying because her heart finally knew what it meant to be loved truly and completely. When they kissed, the room erupted in applause, and Emily knew she had made the right choice. Daniel clapped along with the others, his innocent joy sealing the moment. Married life brought Emily a sense of healing she had long craved. With Alexander by her side, she learned to trust again, to let go of the scars Richard had left behind. Nights once filled with tears were now filled with laughter as they watched Daniel grow, take his first steps and speaking his first words. Emily often caught herself marveling at how far she had come, from a broken woman abandoned by her husband to a wife and mother cherished beyond measure. Alexander never let her forget her worth. He reminded her daily through his actions, whether it was cooking dinner, reading to Daniel, or simply holding her hand during quiet moments. Emily realized that love wasn't about grand gestures, but about consistency, patience, and unwavering commitment. Slowly, the wounds of the past began to fade, replaced by a future she was proud to embrace. Years later, Emily looked out the garden of their home, watching Daniel run across the grass with laughter bubbling from his lips. Alexander sat beside her, his arm draped around her shoulders, his smile warm and content. Life wasn't perfect. There were challenges, struggles, and lessons along the way, but it was theirs, and it was filled with love. Emily had once believed she would die of hunger and heartbreak, as Richard cruelly predicted. Instead, she had found abundance, not in wealth alone, but in love, respect, and happiness. As she watched her son grow and felt the steady presence of her husband beside her, Emily whispered a quiet prayer of gratitude. She had survived betrayal, endured humiliation, and walked through the fire of heartbreak, but she had emerged stronger, wiser, and more cherished than ever before. Her past no longer defined her. What defined her now was the life she had built, the love she had found, and the family she had chosen. And with that, Emily knew her story had only just begun. That's all for today. Like, subscribe, and see you in the next episode. Stay tuned.